So I will be covering how you turn this pill case made of aluminium into a canister like this. So there will be an O-ring when you twist it off right here. I already removed that one because I found it was not reliable as an air seal, let's say. So the way how I go about it, when it's final, I put some GB weld around there, then I just twist it close. Of course not too much, but enough so it makes good contact. Because even thread locker was in my opinion not a good seal. It's a little bit too loose of a fit, so it doesn't not really make an airtight seal. But do of course make sure that you do it at the right moment, because otherwise it's hard to get out loose again and you get something like this. This was because the one I made right here was leaking. I got something like this and it was leaking, so I removed everything. But then you still got this part and it's a little bit hard to deal with. I might experiment with making this piece and then glue it on there. But maybe that works, so I can recycle it, but we will see. But yeah, you got the cap and you got the back end. For the back end you want to make a hole, and you can tap it with threads or choose to just make a hole, then put the GB weld and put it in there. That should be enough. The way how I go about, because I already bought the threading tab for this particular threads, I will tap it, but as you can see I also put some GB weld around it, just to be sure that it works, let's say, that it is airtight, it doesn't get loose over time, things like that. Well, as you can see, it's not centered, it's off center, and the other one that I made is a little bit an angle. It's fine, it doesn't really look that nice, so I made a jig. It should help with centering it. This is a little bit better one than I used on that one, so it should help to give it a correct angle downwards and also centered, and not that it moves side to side, things like that. It's made in different sizes. You can start out with this small one and then don't use a jig and then use a normal drill that you want the correct size for and use that one. It's up to you, but that's basically all you do. You just drill that in, make the size correct, using then optionally you can tap in the threads and then you can twist in the piece for the hose in there. So you got something like this with the GB weld, then it will be staying in place fine. Then for this size, as you can see, you got this mounting point on there. It's probably easy to see with this one. You got this mounting point on there, and you can see there's a little bit of a pocket inside of there, so you don't want to grind it off too low, so it's open. You probably can get away with it with some creative work, but just using the cap like this and then close it off. But for how I done it is like this. So you do want to make sure that you're not going too deep. So what you can check with yours is how deep the inside pocket is. It's basically this line right here for me, so I know I can just leave something like this on there and that's enough, because this side is a lot thinner than the top cap, so if you leave that on there it's fine. When you're cutting off this piece right here, it's better to hold it just on this flat edge, that way it's not so easy for it to twist, and then just cut it off. instead of trying to grab the edge of the cap. You don't have much to grab and it's very close to where you are cutting, so it's a lot easier to just grab it right here and then cut it off. So I made the containers. The new drill jig works really well. For the bottom side it's now straight in, so that's a lot better than have it in an angle or a little bit sideways, let's say. For the top, I have also now made a new jig. I did not use it on this one, but then you will first slide on the drill jig. That will have a drill hole a little bit off center. You do that, do the drilling, and afterwards you will be using that D-shaped part and you will align it with, so the hole will be visible, the drill hole that you made. What you then can do is place this cap on there, just by the bottom, but you get the point. Then you will just put a cap on like that. Then what you want to do is mark this shape on there. Scratch it in there or use a pen, whatever you want to do. Then the rest of the shape you will do with the Dremel. Then you want to make sure that your jig piece that you use to make a pocket inside of this GB weld piece right here can be fitted through this hole. It's fine if it is a little bit wider, then it's more easy to take it out and in. But that's what you want, that this can at least fit inside of there. So then you can let it cool off and prepare for the next step, and that's actually trying to make this piece. This will be done in a few steps. Also very important that you don't skip this step. Check if the output valve itself is okay. I've bought a few from AliExpress back in the day and other places. And some, I don't know what it is, maybe because I got them for a long time. There's something wrong with the O-ring. This O-ring maybe, or this O-ring inside of the behind the spring that goes around the stem. There's some leak there, so no matter how good you make the rest airtight, then there will be still a leak going on. It's not pretty, it's a waste of time basically. Prep price for your valve. This O-ring and this O-ring will be removed. Of course the O-ring that sits on the stem and that will go around the stem that sits inside of there, you will leave those in place. It's probably a good idea to grease this a little bit, this O-ring, because it is later harder to get by because it's packed inside of this. So the only really way to put some grease on an O-ring then that way without taking it all apart is putting it right here basically and let it go inside. Then let it go out a little bit or something like that, so you don't grease up all your nozzle and your barrel. It's not ideal, but that's you pay the price for making something like this yourself, and there isn't always a downside to something, things like that. Even though I talk about this, the first step that we need to do now is the following. You need to make sure first of all that your valve is a correct size. This is measured by this size right here of the valve. It should be the smallest size of the two options that I've given, but I've bought some output valves from AliExpress and those were really thick, and you need to compensate for that. So you can either do that by hand by removing some layer lines, but you need to make sure that this can be fitted in straight and not that this is sticking out so far that it kind of wants to do something like this. It needs to be able to fit in there correctly like this. There will be a cutout right here. This is where the valve will be sitting in, and the mag rubber will also make sure that this is aligned correctly. We do check this. You can also check this by looking from this side to the mech rubber. If it really sticks out like this or that, then it's not correct. With every step you try to make this thing, basically you need to check that it is not in an angle, that it every time is correct, otherwise you have to remove it again and redo it parts for parts. You need to redo it. You don't have to throw it all away, but also one thing that is really important when once you have a valve that fits properly is to make sure that the mech rubber is the correct height. So you will be installing everything like this. You don't have to worry about the other parts, but just make sure that this valve is in there correctly. Then drop it in your lower. Then you will be installing it on the upper, and you want to make sure that it is in good fit with the nozzle. So if it would be too high, you will notice that the feeding pin will touch the mech rubber. You basically want the feeding pin to just go precisely over the mech rubber. There will be some flex in the mech rubber on, so there's air pushed in there, but you don't want it to be too low, otherwise you get some gas efficiency issues. But it should be fine in most. You need to check it, and if it can clear it, and this of course a little bit of play in the bolt, but that can be compensated with the amount of air it will push the rubber up. But just make sure that now your mech rubber is sitting straight in there, it all seems to align properly, and also check if this part is sitting in all the way, so you don't get a false reading. You can put your finger in the macro, kind of make sure that it is not going up or down, something like that, something strange. But this looks all to be correct for this bolt and for this nozzle setup like this. Because with the other system you can change the mech bar catch to adjust the height of the magazine rubber, but with this one it's fixed in this assembly, so there's no longer an option to do so. So you need to make sure that that is correct. I do recommend that you use a valve key for this. That makes it a lot easier to install it and screw it all the way in. Once again, you need to remove the O-ring at the front right here and the one that sits behind here, because otherwise it will not really work, because it cannot really make an air seal with this 3D printed part, will leak. So the next step that you want to do is you will want to use the GB weld, and what you want to do is you want to apply a very thin layer of GB weld on the edge of this. This makes it an closed system, let's say, so there's no leak when the air can flow later on. Otherwise there will maybe a little bit of a gap there and it wants to escape there. You want to minimize all the leaking that you can do. Then what is also important with this step is that you then cover everything of the 3D printed plastic with a thin layer, just so everything is covered. So all this, there will be also a little bit of an opening right here and the 3D printed plastic. You want to make sure that this is all covered. You don't want to, of course, do with something with this right here. Just you can stop right about here, that's enough. You can just cover it. Don't press it in, because there's a gap, and then you will mess with let's say this pocket right here on the inside, and you don't want to get any GB weld. That's why we do it in stages, so you don't mess it up by overpressuring it. Maybe there's a little bit of a crack right here, then you will push the GB weld in. That's the thing that will happen if you do this entire step in one time. That's why we do it in a few steps. This will ensure that everything is airtight and you don't get any strange accidents. Let's say that something is seeping, going over and go cover this and going the system up. Then it's also important that you put the GB weld on this, of course, and a little bit on the metal part. This will make sure that this entire part is airtight, because then there is no contact exposed 3D printed plastic. If you would stop right at the 3D printed plastic, it will just seep a little bit out there. Now this part right here behind here, they got really the pressure behind it. Once it's opened, the valve, that's the moment only that this part and this part gets pressure on it, but that's also the moment it can escape in the nozzle, in the barrel, and in the back part with the piston. So at that moment the pressure is lower than what sits behind here, but still you want to make sure that this is nice and close so you don't have any leakage going on. So that's important. That's why it's important to cover also a little bit of the edge right here. You go all over here and make sure that's nice and covered, let's say. And of course you do the same with the back and the sides when this is installed. But that's why you want to do this one first. That way you can still hold this a little bit without making a total mess. Then you focus more on this part, because that's really crucial that you do this correct, that you go around this and you do this. Then this can always be done also with the second stage, in case you really start to find that it gets a little bit messy to hold it. But you can hold it like this and then do the other parts. Should be fine to do it like that, really thin, so it doesn't really interfere with the mounts, let's say. To really make sure that everything fits, you can then place it inside of this temporary mount. That is a double check, that you can make sure that everything is still at the correct place. It can also help to kind of squeeze a little bit of the GB weld away in case it's getting too bulky, let's say. So then you place it like this and you put a clamp on it. Make sure that this, because it can slide a little bit, make sure it's aligned, and then put the clamp on there and let it sit for a day. You can also say in half day, then it's still a little bit soft, so in case you see something that should not be there, you can still kind of remove it, because after one day it gets really hard. So every little error that you see, then you can still kind of correct it. And let's say that there's a little bit on there, you can gently remove it. It's not ideal, but you get the point. Then it's a little bit more pliable than later, because then you really need to. This one is weeks old and this is really hard now, so it's really hard. But when it's just shorter than a day old, then it's a little bit more easy to modify it a little bit. But yeah, that's the first step that you really want to do with the GB weld. So this is the first step that is done. As you can see, the valve still works. Usually you can reuse this frame because you don't use too much on there, so it's easy to pry it loose. Sometimes you need to use something like a screwdriver to kind of pry it loose. And if you do that gently, then you can reuse the frame in case you want to make some more. So you can put that aside, and then you want to inspect if it is looking good, because so long this is all covered, like that is explained before, then the moment the air will get in at this stage, and this is now all airtight, and it should be even good enough because it's a flowing air stream. It's good enough to make it airtight, but of course we will be adding some more material, a bit like this one to be more precise, so it will be stronger, but still at the very least you know that there are no leakage going on. So this stage is done, and now the next step is to make this step. So you got the air container right here. The goal right here now also is what you want to do with the GP weld is to connect this piece with the canister. So at this piece you don't necessarily have to fill everything up. That is for the final step, because this frame is more open than the final frame, and otherwise you have to cut away a lot of material to make it fit in the original frame. What you now just really want to make sure is that this opening, and basically this opening right here, is now fully enclosed with the help of this jig. And that's all what you really want to do. More is not necessary at this point, so long and if you have some left you can of course put some more here to make it a stronger part already. But that's the main goal. Have this at the correct position, this at the correct position, and enclose this part. And when that is done, then you can proceed to the next step after that, to really put it in the final frame and make it in a shape and glue it basically in the frame. You don't want to do that at this stage yet because you have to remove that anyways. It's really this part and the top of the canister. But at the final stage you would be gluing it in right here, put it in, and kind of make the final filling out the final caps, basically following the cylinder design. That way it will be glued to the frame and also will be able to be locked. If you have to later remove the frame, it can be able to hang just based on the shape by these lines right here and what's in the front. There's a hook right here and it will hang on that, and yeah, and the holes also help a little bit. It's more done to help escape the GB weld in case there's too much there, so you can press it in without having issues, but it will also kind of help to grip the GB weld and the part in place basically. As you can see, this part is covered now, so you don't want to put too much that sits too wide, because then you have to cut it away, and so long you don't let it harden out too much, it's not that big of a deal. But if you do it later, it's gets really hard and it's not necessary to do that. So yeah. In order to do that, we will be using this tool right here. It's important to cover it with some very thin layer of plastic from plastic bag, like that you can use to put your bread in or stuff like that. I put some tape on it and also attach some bolt like you can see right here, so you can have something to grip the part on. But you will put it through there, and this will make sure that there is an empty space in there when you apply the GB weld around it. If you would do it like this, of course there will be still some issues going on, because this part needs to be able to be pulled out later. But as you can see, there's of course still some things exposed that need to be covered, and that's why I use I think it's called kneading gum, like it's used for the charcoal eraser, and charcoal eraser you could also call it. It's the type of clay-like eraser, and what we'll be using it for is to complete the shape. So the valve O-ring is protected by this piece, and you will kind of sculpt it in a way so this kind of flows like a nice pocket. Because this is already closed, you can basically put it around there and it should be fine. You don't have to really worry that it have a nice straight edge or stuff like that. One thing that you do really need to be careful of when you do this step, because it's prone to making it leak, is this area at the bottom. This spot right here is very easy to skip to make the GB weld not go there. So I will be trying a few things with it. I think that I will apply a little bit beforehand already, then do it like this, and then complete the rest of the GB weld, because it's really hard to get it in there, and only a really small gap will also already create a leak, so you don't want to do that. Also keep in mind that you can put it also way too high. You don't really need to do that, but you do need to make sure that when the valve is pushed open, that it will basically, this pocket will give room for that. So if you put it too low, because this sits in an angle, then you might hit the wall, let's say, and you cannot fully open the valve. So yeah, you do want to make sure, of course, that this is still aligned like it should be, so it's not now accidentally standing in an angle. You still need to really make sure that this is correct placed, and that it still fits nicely in the frame and not now giving issues. But do make sure that this is correct and that your alignment with this canister is correct. The spot that is basically flat from the D-shaped needs to be facing the back part of the valve. It's better to say it like that. So I changed my mind a little bit about how I go about it. I made the D-shaped part a little bit longer. This way you do want to make sure that you have not installed the mount for the hose yet. This way you can drop in this piece and you can push it up from below once you are ready to do the GB welding. So you can install the cap, align the piece with the hole, and screw it in, or you can do it later. But that's the idea. Then you can place it up there, and then my idea is to use this soft clay-like erasers to kinda fix this place, this jig in place, so it's in the correct height, and also the angle. You can kinda steer it with that, and then just do it like that. I do recommend that you also kind of play around with this a little bit beforehand, before you do the GB weld, because that way you can kind of practice, that you can imagine that you already applied some GB weld right here, then you push this up, and then you can see if you got the correct height, like something like this would do. I think it's better for you to apply the clay-like eraser stuff before you do move it up, but that's something you kind of want to play with and kind of practice. It's not that big of a deal, but just practice it a little bit. So it's since the GB weld is based on time, just make sure that you're kind of efficient with this entire thing. You can just do it something like this, maybe a little bit cleaner than this, but since this is already airtight, it's basically good enough. But do your best to make sure that it's not too thin, because maybe the pressure will kind of push it in otherwise, to give it some body to adhere on. As you can see, maybe you can see at least, you can still see some copper right here on the valve. Just cover that a little bit with that's the benefit if you do it now, because now you can really get around it really well. Also, when you apply the GB weld beforehand here over here, then it will never cover this the moving part of the valve, let's say. So that's my idea about it. And then imagine that you now apply the GB weld there at the bottom. You can slide this part up. You can decide to go about it like this. So you slide it up, then you press it in. The GB weld is over there. You're gonna give it a push like this. So the GB weld will go maybe a little bit like this. This is also of course the moment that you would want to apply the GB weld in here, so then it's all on there. Also, one idea that I have is to use some tape and go around it like this. So this canister is fully in place. You don't have to worry about it that it is in an angle or something like that. But as you can see, what you then want to do before you apply the GB weld on top of this is just kind of make this smooth like this. And you might want to add a little bit more. You can see that it goes a little bit in here. It's not that big of a deal, but still you kind of want to then apply a little bit more. Just maybe a little bit too much, to be honest, but something like that. And if you play with it, practice it a little bit, then you can see like, okay, that was way too much. But still, this would work. You can just move it a little bit more this side. As long as you don't make it too thick, it's good enough, I've done it before like this. It only increases, let's say, the airflow, but you don't want to make the wall too thin. But this is still okay. You can do it like this, or this is also fine. So that's the thing. So long you apply it first over here, and you can just put it on there, put the tape around, put a clamp on here, so you don't have to worry about it. It will all stay in place. Double check if this is still correctly looking, and then it's a matter of just applying the GB weld over here, connect it over here, connect this piece to here, and cover the entire section right here. That's your main focus. You can also do a little bit in the middle. Again, don't do the sides on the top too much, because the final frame will be a little bit lower, so it will sit in the way if you do that. And you can also see that this part right here is more open than this one, so you don't want to make it too bulky, but just enough so it kind of covers it, and you can make sure that this is a secure fit. But this works really well. I can see this a lot better than what I did in the past, so that makes it a lot easier. So in a way, I think it's still fine to just install it like this instead of making it shift up. Just prep this part right here and just slide it on like this. But at the very least, you can control the angle and the height, and stays in place. And there was an issue with a thing in the past, let's say. There's one important thing I forgot to mention with applying GB weld. The way I like to apply GB weld is kind of in this stepping way. This way you make sure it contacts the entire corner, let's say, in this case, but it's also the same for when you make this. Also remove air bubbles. If there's a little bit air left in here, you can kind of push it out by doing something like this. So that's how I generally kind of apply the GB weld. So I can kind of make sure it becomes one unit, no air bubbles, and it kind of attaches correctly to what I want to attach it to. So this is how it will be looking when you're done. You could use a little bit more GB weld, but this was the amount I mixed up, so you don't really need to use more than this, but you can. And if you want to use more, you can apply it a little bit more on this between here, this section right here in the middle. That way it's a little bit stronger, but this should be fine. So as you can see, I used the clamp to clamp it down, the tape to make sure it's in place, the canister is fully aligned this way, the Mac rubber is at the correct place. Can remove this, do the rest later. So you should be able to pull this out. It gives you a little bit of resistance, but that's because of the eraser stuff that sits on the inside. And as you can see the eraser stuff sitting in there, and that we will remove in a minute. I think I will first just remove the frame. You try to find an opening and then pry it a little bit loose over the entire section, a little bit at a time. That way you can reuse the frame. As you can see over here that the GB weld have touched it, but it should be able to be pulled loose. And otherwise then yeah, you have to reprint it if you want to reuse it. It's made a small part for a reason. Yeah, this one is kinda stuck by the looks of it. So you want to be careful, not damage this, but it should be fine. Like that. So you got this part. There's no really use to press in the button at the moment because there's a lot of eraser stuff on the inside. And now you carefully want to remove eraser stuff without damaging the O-ring. You can use an O-ring picker that's made out of plastic to kinda scrape it out. That's probably better than what I'm doing right now, and I do have those tools, but at the moment I don't know where they are. So I have always used this thing, just a screwdriver, to do it. As you may be able to see, there's still a little bit of eraser left on there. You do kind of want to remove that. Also, you can see there's a little bit of bump in front of the piston going on. That's not ideal. You can choose to kind of use a knife and cut that away, but just be careful that you don't hit the O-ring, otherwise you make a mess. But with that said, there's a lot of airflow around it, on the top and the side, so it should be fine. But that is in an ideal world not something that you want. On the positive side, I've applied a little bit too much GB weld at the bottom, but it does make it that you can kinda assume now that it is airtight, because that's the hardest part to get right. The other part is very easy to see and spot, like okay, that's there's still a hole in there or not, but if that's done, then it should be good. You don't have to remove every little bit of the eraser part. With the models I've made before, I left at certain points a bit of it in, and I've never really had it that it's flown out of it and go in the nozzle or things like that. It seems to stay in place, so at a certain point I'm fine with it and just leave it be. But yeah, one reason why you don't want to wait a few days before you do things like this, cutting and modifying it. Now it's still a little bit soft, so in case you do want to modify this a little bit, you can do it now. It's a little bit more easy. And also when you have to fit it now in this frame, you might run into a thing that is maybe a little bit too thick over there or there, something like that. Now you can still modify that carefully. In my case, I've done it correctly now, I think, and it's not really in part that it's too thick. Maybe a little bit because it stands open a little bit, but that's something you want to check, and then now you can kind of scrape it away a little bit before you move on. That's odd. I see that I moved my shape a little bit in angle. It's just not that big of a deal because the air will just flow there, but it's something that I do notice. Yeah, I used a knife. To clean it out on the inside. It was not a big of a deal. It was mostly the eraser with just a thin layer of GB weld. As you now can see, it's As you now can see, you can pretty much see the O-ring sitting there, so it's got full access to the air, let's say, when it's opened. So that's good. This eraser you can just reuse and reuse again. So long you can remove it from the thing, it's fine. And as you can see, this it got a little bit damaged, probably more from the edge of the cap. Instead of the GB weld, doesn't really stick to it. So you do have to replace the back in this case, but normally you can reuse this a couple times and it's fine. But yeah. Now it's really important that you check if everything is airtight. You can use a flashlight for that. You put it underneath that, and then you will check if you can spot lights going on. It's better to do this in a dark room. And also it helps to just use a light from a phone, because it's a little bit smaller, so you got less light leaking to the side. And then you can check if you see a spot. I'm pretty sure that this one is done correctly, but it helped me in the past to spot if there's a little bit of a light leak, and then you know that would be an air leak. If that is the case, then if you can do it externally, it's fine. You can just do it with GB weld and do it externally. If it's that spot that I mentioned before in this corner, try to push it in from this side as well, and make sure that this side is clean, so clean as you can do with from the eraser stuff, and then do it on the inside as well. You might want to do that on this side if it is something more here, that this was too thin. You can do that as well. Then let that dry before you do the next step, because if you are, at least if you are thinking that the frame will cover it, you might otherwise run, if let's say it's a spot right here, and then you put this clamp on there, you might start to press in the GB weld inside of this pocket, maybe hindering the valve portion, or just blocking up the entire thing. That's not what you want to do. So next, again, really make sure that the part can fit in there correctly, and that you can clamp it down all the way. That's the first thing you really want to do. Then make sure that the 5 pin fits in there, can fit in the frame fine without any issues. Same for the lock pin, just make sure that that part is free moving and that it can be moved up and down very easy. This is not something you want to install right now, but that is something that you do want to make sure that is correct, working, let's say. Now it's more easy to clean the part up. This is an FA model. With the FA model you can install the bolts later on that you have to put in here and here. With the Hammer Fight edition, so the H and the BL, you want to install the bolt from the inside pocket. There will be a pocket like this on the inside, and drop it in and install it a little bit so it doesn't fly out and start to turn and things like that. So you will put the bolt in, of course a lot shorter one, just twist it in a little bit so it starts to catch this thread right there, so it will just stay there and be ready for you later to install it. That's really important, you don't forget that. Then you will install the 5 pin. With this models you don't have to use, and you will not be using a spring in the pocket, especially with the FA it's not even possible. With the BL and H model you can technically do it still, but you don't have to do it because the valve will be acting as your spring, so there's no reason for it. yeah, then it's really a matter of just installing this part. Really make sure that it's in a correct angle, and you can still see there's a little bit off because I still have to clean it up a little bit. So it's you can see it's not correctly. You can see it stands up a little bit on the front. So that's why I need to clean it up a little bit, but that's basically what you want to do. Then you can install those parts, the canister, just test fit it, keep it on hand that you have it. Then when you're actually going to apply the GB weld, apply a little bit on the threads, thread it in. Then I kinda like to use this tool, kinda apply a little bit on the sides as well. Like you can see with this one, so it looks like this. So it looks a little bit like this. This way I'm assured that it will stay in place because the wall is pretty thin. So even if your threads are really good and that you feel like you can use a thread locker to lock it in, I do find it gives me a little bit more assurance that it stays in place. To do this part, I found that thread locker did not really work. It's too loose of a fit. The O-ring failed on me the first time that I tried, so I did not even give it a second try. And you kind of wanted to have this be a solid piece anyway, so it doesn't unthread on you mid-game or something like that. So you can apply a little bit on there. Don't overdo it because otherwise you will just press it in the canister, and you kind of want to keep that clean. But then you can install that. Then apply a little bit with your GB weld over here. Apply a little bit GB weld on the inside of this frame. And you can also, because you can see, there's a pocket right here that can use a little bit of GB weld. And of course over here you can do this beforehand, just fill it up a little bit over here as well, and do this a little bit, then install it, make sure it's aligned correctly, place the second half on it. You will notice that there will be a little bit getting out of there. You can just leave that for now. You can also kind of scrape it away if you want and then reuse it if you need more. But that's basically what you want to do. Just clean it up and kind of give it. Also you can apply GB weld on this section right here. Make it kind of smooth. So this is the highest point you want it to be, and kind of let it flow over to the canister. You can press a little bit inside of here for extra adhesion to the frame. You can still see it a little bit over here. This is the plastic frame, and you can see that I just smooth it out and put some GB weld in there as well, in that pocket. As you can see, that shape will go in there. You can see the stipples, the points, the dots from the holes in the frame, and you can see that it is raised up because I just kind of smooth it out so it's the same size as the canister roughly. You can see that I go a little bit inwards right here. That's fine. Just try to keep it like that. If it sticks out a little bit too much, you can test that the next day with your magazine and maybe remove a little bit. Now it's still a little bit soft, but that's really what you want to do. And then when that is dried, first the next day of course check that it will fit with your magazine correctly. Then it's recommended that you leave it sit at least for 1 day, just to really make sure that this is hardened out. This I've already sit 1 day before, and the first part 2 days at this point, so it should be fine. but just be patient. Don't want to have it rip because maybe a thin pocket somewhere because you're impatient. Just wait a day after you modified it a little bit for the magazine fitment, and then really test it with pressure. You can keep checking if the valve is still workable. It should not be an issue. At the way how we work, you should not run into an issue like that, but if it in some weird case does get stuck, this is really a good point to then take it apart, the frame. Again, you can do that by prying it loose. This frame will most likely break on you when you do this, but you can take this whole assembly apart a little bit like this in one piece, and remove sections at the front and here at the back, and reapply GB weld and glue it back in place. That's fine, but in a case that, and that would be really rare and a strange situation, that the valve at that point gets stuck, then you do need to use a knife or something like that to break this section loose, so you can have in a way this situation going on, but then without the cap, and then you need to kind of look what's going on. Or this is what I had done one time, because I had a hole at the front because of the I used a different plastic, like a sticking wrap plastic, and that was not a good idea, and it was really getting messy with this stuff as well, and I was getting mixed up in the GB weld, so it was getting some holes. What I did at that point was open this section up, so there's also an option that you take a knife and push make a hole right here, and then try to repair and inspect and clean up whatever is going on from here, and then you can no longer remove the canister because it's glued in place, but then that way you can just gently close the hole up without pushing it really in there, the GB weld, so it would hinder the airflow. And that's also a way to do it, to go about it. But removing this after GB welded, the cap and the base is really hard. With this one, you can use heat to break the GB weld, but then you really need to use a torch pump. For what I've seen, I used it up off on a stove. I did not really get it hot enough to really break it loose, because you need to get oil and I need to use it really long on there, so the metal gets really hot. Do keep in mind that might affect this one as well, not to the point it breaks down at the spot, let's say, but it will make it weak. So if you want to do this cap, make this cap removable and use heat, so yeah, that will definitely damage this GB weld section then as well. So then you would have to start all over basically, and the heat will also damage the valve. In case you do need to remove the valve, let's say that you failed and you want to really start over again, you can crush the GB weld a little bit with the pliers. What I also really like to do with that is, because in the beginning I need to retry it a lot, is just take the valve tool, not at this stage necessarily because it's still pretty much one piece, but you can twist it to kind of break this edge loose from the GB weld, and there's of course also a little bit at the front that we did close to the piston, let's say, and that can help to kind of break the valve a little bit loose. Also, this section right here is not really relevant to mess around with because it's not really touching the valve, so you can then if you removed the front section a little bit, and you might want to use a knife a little bit to cut it, the GB weld a little bit away, then you can use the tool to twist the valve out of the threading of the plastic that sits beneath there, and then afterwards the rest is basically disposable. The TPU piece can be reused in some cases, depends on how clean it can be removed from the GB weld. And yeah, so that's basically it on that part, and I will show you later how it will look when it's finished. Then there's also the point that you don't want to apply too much GB weld at the back, because you don't want it to go over and mess up the front part. This can be fixed, of course, by removing the frame later on if you notice that there is something going on, but if you can avoid it, it's better to avoid it. So yeah, you can apply GB weld over here, but don't go too crazy with it. So this is how it will look when you are done with the GB weld. You clamp down the body, let's say, of the assembly. Of course, again, make sure that everything is aligned before you do the clamping. So press it really in there. Make sure, at least by eye, that this looks a little bit straight and not in an angle. That way it should be good. And well, this is a day later, and this still works like expected, really. So that's good. There's some spillover that you kind of want to remove before you let it really set in the GB weld. So that's what I'm going to do now. Some parts will not matter so much, but a little bit of cleanup is necessary. So it will end up with something like this. So this is relatively the same height as the aluminium chamber, let's say. You smooth out the back so it doesn't interfere with the part on the inside of the lower. As you can see, this is a little bit modified, but we said that's something you need to ignore. You can see here sticks it a little bit out, but so long it doesn't hit the magazine, it's fine. So you can check that by even without the hose already installed, just put it in there and then install the magazines. And if you feel a lot of friction, then you know you need to take a look at it, and you can see marks on there, usually with the GB weld on the inside of your magazine, so you know exactly where to remove it. It does look like the part that was sticking out I showed before. It does need some work. You can already see it. It's a little bit lighter now, and that's because it was rubbing against the magazine. I remember now, I added this yesterday to make it a little bit more one piece, but you can see it's a little bit too much, and now it touches the magazine. So that's a clear example where you now want to use a knife and kind of cut it off a little bit, and then this one should be fine to use. For this one it's probably a little bit more work to do that, but that's basically what you want to do. Advice I can give about the hose. About the length of the hose, leave it in a length that you can at the very least still remove this assembly. So this is a lot longer than it needs to be, because it was this length was made for a shorter aluminium chamber in the beginning, but just give yourself that little bit of room so this hose can move forward. so you can move it upwards. Then there's another thing of this hose being supported by a grip. I do really think that this is needed to kind of release the strain of the weight of the remote line that will be fitting on there, and also when you are moving, then it's not all just hanging on this part and going all over the place. How to do those? I've made a few. There are probably a few grips out there because there are so many grips out there that are not compatible and you have to make something on your own. But usually those are the way how I make them. They are kind of a tight fit in the beginning, so you might need to use a knife and kind of scrape off the sides a little bit or sand it a little bit to make it fit. I think the best way to go about it is just make it a friction fit thing. This one is relatively loose, but to make it a friction fit thing, so you cannot at the very least still remove it in case you do want to go over to a normal system, or your hose is a little bit on the shorter side, then you can just lift this out and then remove the system. You keep in mind when you are installing the hose that you do need to install this piece before you attach it to this part, or maybe install this connector as last, but at the very least later it's a little bit harder to do, because when you are installing this the hose will flare out, so it's best to install it first and not do it at a later stage. Otherwise you may need to move a little bit, or it is maybe a little bit of a hard squeeze to get it through this. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I think that will explain how to make. The other steps are quite simple. Just install the bolt from this hole. If you have a hammer fight edition, the bolt should be already in there, like explained before. With an FA you can now install that bolt in this hole. The spring of the lock pin, the hole is open, so that is something that you do have to keep in mind every time you remove it and things like that. The pin you can just drop it in, but you do have to install everything upside down and make sure that the spring stays in place there and it's not getting mangled, let's say, in the lower. That's one downside, but there was no other way to get around that really. One other thing with the hammer fight edition, the way to get this one open, in case you do need to do that, is I use just a screwdriver, push it in between the 5 pin and the body, and then twist the screwdriver. That way you get a start and then you work yourself a little bit around this assembly and then you can rip it apart. Some parts might stick, like I've shown before with this one. Then it's up to you to use some pliers and just kinda rip it off like this. I'm not interested to do that with this one, but you can do that. I've done that a few times. And then it's a matter to clean off the most important contact points with this one, particularly in this one, and maybe a little bit around the edge, and then you can just apply new GB weld and install it again. There are some cases that you can also just install it like this back in a new frame, and that way you got a system that is very easy to remove later on without having to pry it loose, things like that. It does seem to be stable if you do it like that still, but of course nothing will beat if it is really glued on basically on the tube. But yeah, that's basically it. Magazine wise, there's maybe also a thing to cover. It's pretty simple. You can just press in the button. It will look a little bit different with a different type of magazines. Then you do need to be careful. You got the base plate. The base plate is real steel or compatible, let's say. There's a term some people hate, but let's say it is not unmodified. This base plate is also unmodified. So in case there's some funny or different base plates out there, you can use them. But it is as simple as that. You got your spring for the BBs. You got the follower. That doesn't want to get out. You got your follower that will sit inside of the spring. Do recommend that when you have to cut the spring, put the down piece below and have the original clean round piece up. But that's as simple as just installing it like that. So in case you need to clean it or stuff like that, it's pretty easy. You got this spring. This spring is really to make sure that the lock plate is not going anywhere. If you don't use it, it's too easy to remove it. Then you have to make sure that the base plate is installed correctly. The pin needs to sit on the back and not on the front. You can see that with this side. Then it's just a matter of sliding it on. And with the Danny Meatball base plates, I do find that you kind of need to use a screwdriver to kind of get that little pin in place. It can slide a little bit too much, but besides that, it's a good magazine. No complaints. There are two editions of this size. You got one from the Rogue that got an already in support piece in here, so you don't need to use supports. I do find it depends on your print settings. If your overflow is too high, basically it gets really hard to remove it. But the way how I like to remove it is kind of my screwdriver underneath here and kind of pry it loose a little bit like this. Try it also a little bit over here, but you can see you cannot put it very much in there, and then it should be getting loose. You can also go for the Partisan 9 edition, and those don't have any support thing right here. You need to do that manually, so those are really easy. Takes a little bit longer to print, I would guess, because it goes all the way up and more wasted material. Besides that, you got the open and closed edition. They work the same, of course. It's only with the open edition you can put it down by hand, drop BBs in like this, or you can put it all the way down. That's probably the more, and put BBs in from the bottom channel and let it go like that, like you can do with a lot of magazines, and let it go up. Benefit of course with this one is you can see the amount of rounds you still have left, but there's also more chance of dirt getting in there. It looks less realistic, so in case you do like the closed edition, you can choose both with all the magazine options. Then there's this optional thing, otherwise people are going to say something about it. There's a little bit of an opening at the back. This is where the spring is sitting. There's really not really a thing around that. At the first, this piece was a little bit smaller, but then the tolerances with your assembly gets a little bit tight, so I made it wider. But then I was running into that spring opening issue. Structurally it's fine, of course it's an opening for dirt to get in, but yeah, so is this part, so it should be fine, not something to worry about. So I left it for that, because I know that the spring magazine itself work fine. Don't want to really go and redesign it for that, just that little opening right there. So I'm aware of that, but you really don't see it unless with the close one you can't really see it. You can see a little bit of the spring sitting there, but that's all, because there's no light getting through there. With this one you can see a little bit of a light getting through there, but this one you can't. So yeah, that's it. I hope this helps. I will also make a manual, of course, but for the first stages I will leave it like this. Do keep in mind, of course, with videos like this, the manual is a lot easier to update than a video, so there might be some tips getting in from other people based on the beta that will be applied and noted in the manual, not in this video. I will not make a new video for this, but this at least you get to see it a little bit, and you can get started with it. So yeah, that's pretty much it, and I hope you get good results with this, and if you that you maybe can use this in a different project that is a little bit similar to this but a different model, this concept, and yeah. And also, of course, people will be wondering, why do I not just use resin to print this? I do think it's possible to do this, but I don't have a resin printer, so I wanted to keep it something that was more labor intensive, but something that can anybody do with a basic 3D printer. Also, I have really no experience modeling for resin printers, so there would be really some feedback needed to make an appropriate model, and some safety testing needs to be done, so it's not dangerous and we know what materials need to be used. There's a lot of unknowns on my end about that, so that's why I did not do it. And very important that I forgot to mention is, of course, when this is fully dried and everything is fitted and is installed, first use a low pressure FPS and build it up. Make sure that you don't hear any leaks, but also check, of course, and leave this at the first stages, just leave it a lot further away from you. If you have a paintball mask or something like that, wear that just to be safe. Install the magazine, not even with BBs in there, but just to give a little bit of a buffer in case it does explode. I don't think it will. I've not seen it happen with my testing, and I've I've even just with less GB weld than this, just put it in a can of water and nothing happened, and it should be safe. But just to be sure, because you're still pressurizing something, just make sure that it is not leaking. Build it up to the 130 psi, 140 can also be used. I've accidentally also used more, but there was with a slight leak in there, so you can say, okay, it is not actually at 160 psi, but it should be fine. But the parts and things, everything, you should be able to use this replica at 130, 140 psi. There's really no reason to go higher. That's only more stress on everything, on your nozzle, on the valve and all the components. There's really no need for that, really, unless you have really cycling issues, but then it's really, there should be something else going on. But that is one step that you should not be ignoring, let's say. So and on a side note, you see that mine containers got a lot of scratches on there. This is because I use pliers, and that's really prone to slipping when you are trying to grind it off and things like that, and drilling. So I did make a different jig that will go in a vise, and that are 3D printed plastic halves that go around it. It should be able to grip this and might make it look a little bit cleaner. Otherwise, yeah, there's not really that much to go around and weight around it. You can see, like, if you do it for show and you use the black ones, grip it a little bit higher up, that way you don't see it when it's installed. You can see here with the red one, you can still see it, because I did not really, I don't really care that much about it. I'm more focused on getting it done and discovering the easiest way to do it, then really make sure it looks pretty at this stage at least. But yeah, that's at least one idea that I have about it. You can of course also wrap something around your pliers so it's not a little bit protected by plastic, let's say, like tape or electrician tape. That might work, but yeah, that's something to keep in mind.